She jumped into the river for a stranger, 24 hours. Later, the current returned something precious. The sky was pitch black, rain pouring down like a waterfall, lightning tearing across the heavens in jagged white scars. I was running along the riverbank, my shoes sinking deep into the mud with every desperate step. The sound of rushing water filled my ears, but above it all, I could hear something that made my blood run cold. A voice, screaming for help, barely audible over the roar of the swollen river. My name is Emily Carter, and I've been a nurse at Riverside General for 3 years. I know what it means to save lives, to make split-second decisions that determine whether someone goes home to their family or not. But nothing had prepared me for this moment. As I reached the edge of the bank, I saw him. A man, thrashing in the dark water, his head disappearing beneath the surface every few seconds. The current was vicious, pulling him downstream toward the old concrete bridge where the water churned like a washing machine. I couldn't think. My father had drowned in this same river when I was 12, and I'd sworn I'd never let anyone else suffer the same fate. I kicked off my shoes and dove in, the icy water hitting my body like 1,000 needles. The shock nearly knocked the breath from my lungs, but I forced myself to swim toward the stranger. Lightning flashed again, and for just a moment I could see his face clearly. He was young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and eyes wide with terror. "Hold on!" I screamed, though I doubt he could hear me over the storm. The current was stronger than I'd expected, dragging both of us toward the bridge. I managed to grab his arm just as his head went under again. He was heavy, dead weight, and I realized he was barely conscious. But there was something else. He was clutching something against his chest, a metal box about the size of a laptop, holding it like his life depended on it. I've lived quietly by this river my entire life, in a small cottage that my grandmother left me. After my father's accident, most people thought I'd move away, but I couldn't. This place holds too many memories, both beautiful and painful. The river that took my father also gave me peace on countless evenings when I'd sit on my porch and watch the water flow by. I work the night shift at the hospital, so I'm usually awake during the storms. That's how I heard him calling for help. The man I was trying to save turned out to be Ethan Hayes, though I wouldn't learn his name until much later. As I fought against the current, dragging him toward the shore, I caught glimpses of his face in the lightning flashes. There was something different about him, something that didn't quite fit with a typical drowning victim. His clothes, though soaked, looked expensive, military-style boots, and that metal box he refused to let go of, even as he was losing consciousness. When we finally reached the muddy bank, both of us collapsed. I was exhausted, my lungs burning from the cold water and exertion. Ethan was barely breathing, water streaming from his mouth and nose. I immediately started CPR, pressing hard on his chest, tilting his head back to clear his airway. "Come on," I whispered between compressions. "Don't you dare die on me now." After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, he coughed up river water and gasped for air. As he regained consciousness, his first instinct was to check for that metal box. His hands frantically searched the mud around us until he found it, pulling it close to his chest like a mother protecting her child. His eyes, now focused but filled with something I couldn't identify, fear, maybe, or desperation, met mine. "Don't let them take it," he whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "Promise me, don't let them take it." Before I could ask what he meant, his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness again. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, alerted by a neighbor who'd seen us by the river. They loaded Ethan into the ambulance, and I rode along, still shivering in my wet clothes. At the hospital, they treated me for mild hypothermia and exhaustion while Ethan was taken to the ICU. I spent the night in observation, wrapped in warm blankets, drinking hot coffee, and trying to process what had happened. The doctors said I'd saved his life, that he wouldn't have lasted another 5 minutes in that water. But while I was recovering in the hospital, disaster struck at home. The storm that had brought Ethan into my life had also caused the river to overflow its banks. When I returned the next morning, my cottage was gone. Not damaged, not flooded, gone. The foundation remained, along with a few broken pieces of furniture scattered across what used to be my yard, but everything else had been swept away by the current. 28 years of memories, photographs of my parents, my grandmother's jewelry, my books, my clothes, everything was now somewhere downstream, probably in the ocean. I stood there in the morning light, staring at the empty space where my home used to be, feeling completely hollowed out. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd saved a stranger's life and lost everything I owned in the process. When I went back to the hospital to check on Ethan, hoping maybe to find some meaning in what had happened, the nurses told me he'd checked himself out during the night. No forwarding address, no insurance information, no way to contact him. It was as if he'd never existed. That first night after losing my home, I stayed in a motel on the outskirts of town. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and his mysterious metal box. Who was he? What was he carrying that was so important he'd rather drown than let go of it? And why did he disappear without even a thank you? I felt like I'd saved a ghost, and in return, I'd lost everything that mattered to me. The next day, I returned to the riverbank where my cottage had stood. In the daylight, the destruction looked even worse. The old oak tree where I used to read was uprooted and lying on its side. The garden where my grandmother had taught me to grow tomatoes was now just a muddy crater. I walked along the water's edge, looking for anything that might have survived the flood, but found nothing but debris and twisted metal. As evening approached, I noticed something strange. There was a faint light coming from beneath the water, near where the old dock used to be. At first, I thought it might be a reflection from a passing car, but the light seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The wind picked up, rustling through the remaining trees, and for a moment I swear I heard my father's voice carried on the breeze. "You'll find what the river kept," he seemed to whisper. "Look for what the current couldn't take away." I shook my head, telling myself it was just exhaustion and stress playing tricks on my mind. But the light under the water continued to pulse, and I found myself wading in up to my knees, searching the muddy bottom with my hands. That's when I felt it a piece of metal, smooth and cold, wedged between two rocks. I pulled it free and held it up to the moonlight. It was a small metal plate, engraved with words that made my blood run cold. "Find me before they do." The message sent chills down my spine. Someone was looking for Ethan, and apparently they meant him harm. I pocketed the metal plate and hurried back to my motel room, double-checking the locks on the door. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound in the hallway, every car that passed by the window, made me jump. I kept thinking about Ethan's desperate words, "Don't let them take it." The next morning, I was having coffee at the local diner when I overheard two men at the next table talking about the storm and the aircraft incident that had happened the same night. One of them mentioned that a military transport plane had gone down somewhere over the national forest, and that search and rescue teams were still looking for the pilot. My heart started racing. Could Ethan have been that pilot? It would explain his military-style boots and his mysterious disappearance from the hospital. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the man in the black coat until he slid into the booth across from me. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Emily Carter," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I understand you pulled someone from the river 2 nights ago." His voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. "I'm sorry, who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who's very interested in finding the man you saved, and more specifically, interested in finding what he was carrying." He leaned forward slightly. "A metal box, about this size," he said, holding up his hands to indicate the dimensions. "Silver, with a digital lock. Have you seen it?" I shook my head, lying instinctively. Something about this man screamed danger, and every instinct I had was telling me to get away from him as quickly as possible. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, standing up and reaching for my purse. The man I saved didn't have anything with him. His smile grew wider, and somehow that made it even more terrifying. "Miss Carter," he said as I turned to leave, "I really hope you're telling the truth. Because if you're not, if you're hiding something that doesn't belong to you, things could become very unpleasant very quickly." I walked out of the diner as calmly as I could, but once I was outside, I practically ran to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. That afternoon, I drove to the Veterans Affairs office in the next town over. I figured if Ethan really was military, someone there might be able to help me understand what was going on. The clerk was a kind, elderly woman who listened patiently as I described what had happened. When I mentioned the name Ethan Hayes, her expression changed. She excused herself and returned a few minutes later with a retired Air Force colonel named Bob Martinez. Colonel Martinez took me into his private office and closed the door. "Emily," he said, his voice grave, "what I'm about to tell you is classified information, but given the circumstances, I think you have a right to know what you've gotten yourself into." He sat down across from me and folded his hands on his desk. Captain Ethan Hayes was carrying highly sensitive data when his transport went down. That data contains intelligence that could save thousands of lives or destroy them, depending on whose hands it falls into. "What kind of data?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Colonel Martinez sighed deeply. "Without going into specifics, let's just say it's information about terrorist cells operating in major American cities. Information that our government has spent years gathering, and information that certain hostile nations would kill for." He leaned forward. "That man in the black coat who approached you, he's not one of the good guys, Emily. If he gets his hands on that data, a lot of innocent people are going to die." I felt the weight of the metal plate in my pocket like it was made of lead. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "I don't even know where Ethan is." Colonel Martinez stood up and walked to the window. "That's the thing, Emily. Ethan is probably hiding somewhere, trying to figure out his next move. But he's going to need that data back, and he's going to need someone he can trust, someone who already risked their life to save him." That night, I returned to the ruins of my cottage, hoping against hope that I might find some clue about where Ethan had gone. The rain had started again, not as heavy as the night of the storm, but steady and cold. I used my phone's flashlight to search through the debris, looking for anything that might give me a hint about what to do next. That's when I heard a soft mechanical beeping coming from the direction of the river. I followed the sound to the water's edge, where something was washing up against the partially submerged remains of my old dock. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it clearly, the metal box that Ethan had been clutching when I pulled him from the river. Somehow, the current had brought it back to the exact spot where my home used to stand. My hands were trembling as I waded into the water and pulled it free. The box was heavier than I'd expected, and I could hear something electronic humming inside it. There was a digital keypad on the front, currently displaying a series of red numbers counting down 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 32 seconds. As I watched, the numbers decreased. Whatever was inside this box, it was on some kind of timer. I tucked it under my jacket and started back toward shore, but I wasn't alone. The man in the black coat was standing on the bank, flanked by 2 other men in similar attire. All 3 of them had their hands inside their jackets, and I didn't need to guess what they were reaching for. "Miss Carter," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the water. "I told you things would become unpleasant if you weren't truthful with me. Now, please bring me that box, and we can all go home tonight." I looked at the timer on the box. 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 8 seconds. Whatever Ethan had been protecting, these men wanted it badly enough to threaten me for it. I thought about my father, about how he died in this river trying to save others when their boat capsized. I thought about the oath I'd taken as a nurse, to do no harm and to protect life above all else. If Colonel Martinez was right, then the lives of thousands of people might depend on keeping this box away from these men. "I don't think so," I called back, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. The man in the black coat sighed dramatically. "Emily, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. We're going to get that box, one way or another. The question is whether you'll be alive when we do." That's when I saw the guns, pulled from their concealed holsters, and pointed directly at me. I ran, not toward shore, where the 3 men were waiting, but downstream, staying in the water where they couldn't easily follow. The current was strong but manageable, and I used it to help carry me away from immediate danger. Behind me, I could hear shouting, and the sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush along the bank. They were trying to pace me, but the river curved away from the road, leading into the dense forest that surrounded the national park. The water was freezing, and the metal box was getting heavier with each step, but I kept moving. The timer now read 1 hour, 53 minutes, and 12 seconds. I had no idea what would happen when it reached 0, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be good. As I rounded a bend in the river, I saw something that gave me hope, an old rope bridge that crossed the water about 50 yards ahead. If I could reach it, I might be able to get out of the water and lose my pursuers in the forest. But as I got closer to the bridge, I realized it was in worse shape than I'd thought. Several of the wooden planks were missing, and the ropes looked frayed and weathered. Still, it was my best option. I hauled myself up onto the bank and started across, trying not to look down at the rushing water below. The bridge swayed and creaked with every step, and I could hear the men in black coats getting closer. Halfway across, one of the planks gave way under my weight. I managed to catch myself on the rope railing, but the metal box slipped from my grip and dangled by its handle from my wrist. The timer was now visible, 1 hour, 40, 1 minutes, and 37 seconds. From the forest behind me, I heard a voice shout, "There she is," followed by the sound of running feet on the bridge. I didn't wait to see if the bridge would hold their weight. I jumped, landing hard in the shallow water on the far side of the river. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to keep moving. The forest was thick here, full of fallen logs and dense undergrowth that would make it difficult for anyone to follow. I could hear the bridge creaking and groaning behind me, and then a loud crack followed by splashing and cursing. At least one of my pursuers had ended up in the water. I pushed deeper into the woods, using my phone's flashlight sparingly to avoid being seen. The box's timer continued its relentless countdown. 1 hour, 32 minutes, and 15 seconds. Whatever was supposed to happen when it reached 0, I was running out of time to figure it out. That's when I heard a new sound cutting through the forest, the distinctive whop 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 of a helicopter rotor. At first, I thought it might be my pursuers calling in reinforcements, but as the aircraft got closer, I realized it was military. Through the trees, I could see searchlights sweeping back and forth across the forest floor. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Emily Carter, this is Captain Hayes with the United States Air Force. If you can hear this, please signal your location. You're in danger, and we're here to help." I scrambled up the nearest hill, waving my phone's flashlight in the air. The helicopter spotted me immediately, hovering overhead as a figure rappelled down through the trees. It was Ethan, dressed in military fatigues and carrying what looked like enough weapons to outfit a small army. He landed gracefully a few feet away from me, quickly unhooking himself from the rope. "Emily," he said, his voice filled with relief and urgency, "thank God you're safe. I've been looking for you ever since I heard they'd made contact." He glanced at the metal box in my hands and then at the timer. 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 48 seconds. "We need to get out of here right now. That box is set to transmit its contents to a satellite uplink when the timer reaches 0. If the wrong people get their hands on that transmission—" "I know," I said, cutting him off. "Colonel Martinez explained everything. But Ethan, there are 3 men with guns looking for us, and I don't think they're going to just let us fly away." As if summoned by my words, gunshots rang out from the forest below us. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over Ethan's radio. "We've got hostiles approaching from the south. I count at least 6 armed individuals." Ethan grabbed my hand and started pulling me toward a clearing where the helicopter could land. "Emily, I need you to know something," he said as we ran. "The reason I disappeared from the hospital, the reason I couldn't thank you properly, it's because I knew they'd come after anyone who'd helped me. I was trying to protect you." More gunshots echoed through the trees, closer this time. "Well, that worked out great," I replied, trying to inject some humor into our desperate situation. Despite everything, Ethan smiled. "You know, for someone who just jumped into a river to save a complete stranger, you're taking all of this remarkably well." The helicopter was landing now, its rotors whipping the trees into a frenzy. We were almost there when the man in the black coat stepped out from behind a large pine tree, his gun trained directly on us. "That's far enough," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around us. "Captain Hayes, I'm Agent Morrison with the National Security Agency. You're going to hand over that box, and you're going to do it right now." Ethan stepped protectively in front of me, his own weapon drawn. "Morrison, you're NSA, which means you should know better than anyone what's in this box and why it can't fall into the wrong hands." "The only wrong hands," Morrison replied, "are yours. That data belongs to the United States government, not to some rogue pilot who thinks he knows better than his superiors." The timer on the box now read 57 minutes and 31 seconds. I could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. Both men had their fingers on their triggers, and I was caught in the middle. "Ethan," I said quietly, "what happens if the timer reaches 0? He kept his eyes on Morrison but answered me. "If the encryption isn't disabled before 0, the data gets transmitted automatically to a backup location. It's a failsafe to prevent exactly this kind of situation." Morrison's expression darkened. "And where exactly is this backup location, Captain?" "Somewhere safe," Ethan replied. "Somewhere people like you can't get to it." That's when I realized the truth. Ethan wasn't a rogue pilot. He was trying to protect the data from Morrison and whoever Morrison was working for. The real question was, who were the good guys in this situation? The timer read 3 minutes and 42 seconds. The standoff was broken by the helicopter pilot's voice over the radio. "We've got more hostiles incoming from multiple directions. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now." Morrison's two associates appeared from the forest, their weapons drawn. We were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of time. The metal box in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Emily," Ethan said without taking his eyes off Morrison, "I need you to input a code into that box. The numbers are 774921. Can you do that?" I looked down at the keypad, my hands shaking. "What happens when I enter the code?" Morrison shouted over the helicopter noise. "Don't touch that keypad. If you enter the wrong code, the data will be permanently destroyed." "That's the point," Ethan replied. "Emily, the choice is yours. You can trust Morrison and his people and hope they really are the good guys, or you can trust me. But you need to decide right now." The timer read 51 minutes and 18 seconds. I thought about everything Colonel Martinez had told me, about the thousands of lives that hung in the balance, about the man in the black coat who had threatened me in the diner. I started entering the code. Morrison lunged forward, and Ethan fired a warning shot into the air. "Stay back," he shouted. The first three numbers were entered, 774. Morrison's associates were closing in from both sides. The helicopter pilot was shouting something about needing to leave immediately. My finger hovered over the 9 key. "Emily, stop," Morrison yelled. "You don't understand what you're doing. That data contains the locations of undercover agents in terrorist organizations around the world. If it's destroyed, those agents will die." I hesitated, my finger still poised over the keypad. Could Morrison be telling the truth? Was I about to sentence innocent people to death? "He's lying," Ethan said firmly. "Emily, the data contains evidence of illegal NSA operations that Morrison has been involved in. Operations that have already gotten people killed. If he gets his hands on it, he'll destroy the evidence and disappear. You have to trust me." The timer now read 49 minutes and 57 seconds. I looked at Ethan, really looked at him. I saw the same desperation in his eyes that I'd seen when I pulled him from the river, but there was something else there too, honesty. This was a man who had risked his life to protect something important, who had tried to shield me from danger even when it meant giving up his chance to disappear safely. I pressed the 9 key. Morrison fired his weapon, but not at me. The bullet caught Ethan in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. "You stupid girl," Morrison screamed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I entered the final 2 numbers, 2, 1. The timer stopped with 48 minutes and 33 seconds remaining, and the box made a soft chiming sound. "It's done," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I'd accomplished. The box felt lighter somehow, as if whatever had been inside it was gone. Morrison was advancing on me, his gun raised, when the helicopter pilot opened fire from above. Morrison and his men dove for cover, giving Ethan and me the chance we needed to reach the aircraft. I helped Ethan to his feet, his wounded shoulder bleeding but not life-threatening. We stumbled toward the helicopter as bullets whined overhead. The pilot, a young woman with short blonde hair and steady hands, kept the aircraft hovering just long enough for us to climb aboard. As we lifted off, I could see Morrison and his men emerging from their hiding spots, their weapons trained uselessly at the sky. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the rotor noise. Ethan, who was being treated by a medic, managed a weak smile. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere Morrison and his people can't follow." The helicopter banked sharply to the left, and I caught a glimpse of the river below, winding through the forest like a silver ribbon in the moonlight. As we flew through the night sky, Ethan explained what had really happened. He had been transporting evidence of illegal NSA surveillance operations that had resulted in the deaths of several undercover agents and innocent civilians. Morrison and his team had been trying to retrieve the evidence to cover up their crimes. The code I'd entered hadn't destroyed the data, it had transmitted it securely to FBI headquarters, where it would be used to prosecute Morrison and his co-conspirators. "The timer," I asked, "what would have happened if it had reached 0? Ethan winced as the medic tightened the bandage on his shoulder. "Nothing good. Morrison's people had planted a virus in the helicopter's systems. If the timer had reached 0 without the proper code being entered, the virus would have activated and sent our location directly to them. We would have been sitting ducks." I thought about the metal plate I'd found in the river, the one with the message, "Find me before they do." It had been Ethan's way of telling me that he was in hiding, that he needed my help to complete his mission. Somehow, the river that had taken so much from me had also brought me exactly where I needed to be at exactly the right time. The helicopter touched down at a military base just as the sun was beginning to rise. As we disembarked, Ethan handed me a set of keys. "These are to a house about 20 miles from your hometown," he said. "It's not much, but it's safe, and it's yours for as long as you need it. Consider it a small thank you for saving my life and helping me save a lot of other lives." I looked at the keys, then at Ethan, then at the sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "What happens now?" I asked. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Now Morrison and his people go to prison, the evidence gets to the right people, and you get to start over. The river took away your old life, Emily, but maybe it was making room for a better one." As I walked toward the waiting car that would take me to my new home, I thought about everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. I'd lost my house, my possessions, and my sense of security, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that sometimes, when you jump into dark water to save a stranger, the current brings back something even more precious than what it took away. It brings back purpose, hope, and the understanding that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose who we want to be. The car pulled away from the base, carrying me toward my new life, and I couldn't help but smile. Behind me, the helicopter was already preparing for its next mission, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of running water, reminding me that rivers don't just take things away. Sometimes, if you're brave enough to jump in, they carry you exactly where you need to go.